The blood on her wedding dress had long since turned from crimson to rust, but Willow Ortega could still see it every time she closed her eyes, still feel the weight of her father's body as he collapsed into her arms on what should have been the happiest day of her life. That was 3 years ago in Santa Fe, and she had sworn then that she would never trust another man as long as she lived, a promise she had kept through every dusty mile that brought her to Sonora, California in the spring of 1878. She stood now behind the counter of her small general store, watching the miners and ranchers come and go with their purchases, keeping her words brief and her eyes downcast. The store had belonged to her aunt, a spinster who had passed the previous winter and left everything to her only niece. It was enough. The building was sturdy, the customers were steady, and most importantly, she could run it alone without depending on any man for anything. The bell above the door chimed, and Willow glanced up briefly before returning her attention to the ledger in front of her. She recognized him as one of the ranch hands from the O'Donnell spread, a newer arrival to town. He had been in twice before, always polite, always quick with his business. She preferred those kinds of customers. "Afternoon, madam," he said, his voice carrying a slight drawl that marked him as someone from farther south. "I need some coffee beans, about 5 pounds if you have them, and a new pair of work gloves, the leather ones if they are in stock." Willow nodded without looking at him directly. "The gloves are on the shelf behind you. I will measure the coffee." She could feel his eyes on her as she worked, measuring out the beans with practiced efficiency. Most men in Sonora had learned by now that Willow Ortega was not interested in conversation, courtship, or anything else they might offer. She had made that clear enough in her first weeks here, turning down 3 proposals and twice as many dinner invitations with the same cold politeness that had eventually earned her a reputation as the ice queen of Main Street. "That will be $2.30, she said, wrapping the coffee in brown paper. The cowboy counted out the money carefully, placing each coin on the counter rather than in her hand. She noticed that small gesture, though she gave no sign of it. Most men either tried to touch her hand during transactions or made a show of dropping the money so she would have to reach for it. "Thank you, madam," he said, gathering his purchases. "Have a good afternoon." After he left, Willow found herself thinking about him despite her better judgment. She shook her head sharply, dismissing the thought. It did not matter if he was polite or respectful. Her father had been both of those things, and so had Thomas Whitfield, the man who had put a bullet in him over a disputed land claim while Willow stood there in her white dress watching her world end. The afternoon passed slowly. Mrs. Henderson came in for flour and sugar, gossiping about the new school teacher. Old Mr. Chen stopped by for tobacco and paid with coins from the gold field where he still worked, despite his 70 years. 2 children bought penny candy with sticky coins, and Willow found herself almost smiling at their excitement before remembering herself and returning to her usual careful blankness. She was closing up when she heard the commotion outside. Men were shouting, and there was the sound of breaking glass. Willow locked her cash box quickly and moved to the window, peering through the curtain. A crowd had gathered outside the Silver Dollar Saloon across the street. She could see 2 men grappling in the dirt, throwing wild punches, while others cheered them on. This was another reason she kept to herself. The violence that men carried with them like a second skin, always ready to erupt over the smallest slight or the strongest whiskey. She had seen enough of it to last a lifetime. But then she noticed something that made her chest tighten with unexpected fear. The crowd was pushing closer to the fighters, and in the chaos, a young boy had been knocked down near the horse posts. He could not have been more than 7 years old, and he was directly in the path of a spooked horse that was rearing up, its hooves flashing dangerously close to the child's head. Willow did not think. She ran from the store, her skirts bunched in her hands, moving faster than she had moved in 3 years, but someone else was faster. The cowboy from earlier appeared from nowhere, diving forward and scooping the boy up in one smooth motion, rolling them both away from the horse's deadly hooves. They landed in a heap near the boardwalk, and the cowboy immediately checked the boy for injuries, his hands gentle but thorough. "You are all right," he was saying. "Just a little scare, that is all. Can you tell me your name?" "Billy Henderson," the boy whimpered. Well, Billy, let us get you back to your mama. I bet she's worried sick about you. Willow stood frozen on the boardwalk, her heart pounding. Mrs. Henderson came running from the dry goods store, tears streaming down her face as she grabbed her son and held him close. The cowboy stood and brushed the dust from his clothes, saying something quietly to the grateful mother before turning away. His eyes met Willow's for just a moment, and she saw something in them that unsettled her. Not pride or expectation of praise, but something quieter, something that looked almost like understanding. She turned and walked back to her store without a word, but her hands were shaking as she locked the door. That night, lying in her small bedroom above the shop, Willow could not stop thinking about what she had witnessed. It had been a small thing, really. A child saved from harm, nothing more. Men did brave things all the time. Usually before they did terrible things. Thomas Whitfield had once saved a family from a fire. Her father had told that story at their engagement party, praising his future son-in-law's courage. 2 weeks later, Thomas had shot him over a piece of land and left Willow kneeling in the dirt, her dress soaking up her father's blood while he rode away without looking back. Courage meant nothing. Kindness meant nothing. They were just masks that men wore until they decided to show their true faces. But sleep would not come. And in the darkness, she kept seeing the cowboy's careful movements as he checked the boy for injuries, the way he had asked for the child's name to calm him down, the way he had simply walked away afterward without seeking acknowledgement or reward. She told herself it meant nothing, but the thought followed her into her dreams anyway. The next morning, Willow opened the store at her usual time, 6 o'clock sharp. She prided herself on her routine, the predictability of her days. Routine meant control, and control meant safety. She swept the floor, dusted the shelves, and arranged the new shipment of canned goods that had arrived on yesterday's stage. She was pricing a crate of apples when the bell chimed. It was him again, the cowboy, and this time Willow found herself looking at him more carefully. He was tall, perhaps 6 feet, with dark hair that curled slightly at his collar, and eyes the color of creek water in summer. His face was tanned from long hours in the sun, with lines at the corners of his eyes that suggested he smiled more often than he frowned. He was young, probably not much older than her own 24 years. "Morning, madam," he said, removing his hat. "I hope I'm not here too early." "The store is open," Willow replied, keeping her voice neutral. "What do you need?" "Some salve if you have it. One of the horses got into some barbed wire yesterday, and I want to keep the cuts from getting infected." Willow moved to the shelf where she kept the medical supplies. "This one works well on animals," she said, selecting a tin. "Apply it twice daily and keep the wounds clean." "I appreciate it." He paused, then added, "That was a brave thing you did yesterday, running out like that." Willow stiffened. "I did nothing. You were the one who saved the boy. You ran toward danger to help a child. That takes courage." "It was foolish, not courageous. Fortunately, you were there." She placed the tin on the counter with more force than necessary. 50 cents. He paid, again placing the coins carefully on the counter rather than in her hand. "Name is Frank O'Brien. By the way, I've been working at the O'Donnell Ranch for about 3 months now. Figured, since I'm in here pretty regular, we should probably know each other's names." Willow hesitated. This felt like a line being crossed, the thin barrier she had built between herself and everyone in this town. But she could not think of a polite way to refuse without seeming rude, and despite everything, some part of her still clung to the manners her mother had taught her. "Willow Ortega," she said finally. "Pleased to make your acquaintance, Miss Ortega." He touched his hat brim and left. Over the following days, Frank O'Brien became a regular presence in her store. He came in every few days, always needing something. Boot polish, ammunition, a new bandana, writing paper. Each time he was polite, respectful, and never lingered longer than his business required. He did not try to make unnecessary conversation or ask personal questions. He simply made his purchases and left. Willow told herself she did not care, did not notice. But she found herself listening for the bell, found her eyes drifting to the window when she heard horses outside, found herself wondering about him in the quiet moments between customers. It annoyed her, this unwanted curiosity. She did not want to wonder about anyone, especially not a man, but Frank O'Brien was like a puzzle with pieces that did not quite fit the pattern she had come to expect. He was a cowboy, but his hands were calloused in a way that suggested he did more than just ride and rope. He was young, but he moved with the careful consideration of someone older. He was handsome, but he never used that to his advantage, never tried to charm or flirt. One afternoon, about 2 weeks after their first real exchange, Willow was restocking the shelves when she heard angry voices outside. She looked out to see 3 men surrounding Frank in the street. She recognized them as hands from the competing Henderson ranch. Rough men known for their drinking and their tempers. "You made me look bad in front of the boss," one of them was saying, his voice slurred with afternoon whiskey. "Told him our way of breaking horses was too rough." Frank's voice was calm. "I just said there were gentler methods that work just as well and leave the horse less traumatized. Nothing against you, Carl." "Sounded like something against me." Carl pushed Frank's shoulder. "Sounded like you were calling me cruel." Willow's hands tightened on the canned goods she was holding. She knew how this would go. She had seen it 100 times. Frank would push back, and fists would fly, and it would not matter who started it or why. Men and their violence, as predictable as sunrise. But Frank did not push back. He held up his hands, taking a step backward. "I apologize if it came across that way. That was not my intention. You have been doing this longer than I have, and I meant no disrespect." "You calling me old now?" Carl demanded. But there was uncertainty in his voice. Frank's refusal to engage seemed to be confusing him. "I am saying you have more experience," Frank said evenly, "and I am saying I am sorry if my words offended you. That was not what I wanted. Can I buy you and your friends a drink to make up for it?" Carl blinked. Clearly thrown off balance by the offer, his friends looked at each other, equally uncertain. The fight they had been spoiling for had evaporated, leaving them standing in the street, feeling foolish. "I guess that would be all right," Carl said finally, his belligerence deflating. Willow watched as Frank walked with them to the saloon, his posture relaxed and friendly. She realized she had been holding her breath, and she let it out slowly. He had walked away. He had chosen peace over pride, de-escalated instead of fighting. It was such a small thing, and yet it felt monumental to her, standing there with a can of peaches in each hand. Thomas would have shot all 3 of them and called it self-defense. Her father would have tried to talk them down too, but he would have done it with righteous indignation, making it about their moral failings. Frank had simply apologized, offered a kindness, and walked away with his pride intact and no blood spilled. She turned back to her shelves, but her hands were unsteady. The spring days grew warmer, and Sonora bustled with activity. The mines were producing well, and the ranches were busy with new calves and the endless work of maintaining the land. Willow's store did steady business, and she found herself falling into an easy rhythm with the town's patterns. Frank continued to come in regularly, and despite her best efforts to remain aloof, Willow found herself relaxing slightly around him. He never pried, never pushed, never expected anything more than what she offered. Slowly, their exchanges grew longer, extending from simple transactions to brief conversations about the weather, the town news, the quality of the latest shipment of goods. "These apples came all the way from Oregon," she found herself telling him one morning. "The stage driver said the orchards up there are something to see." "I heard that too," Frank said, examining one of the fruits. "Must be beautiful country. I will take 4 of these, please." "Have you been to Oregon?" The question was out before she could stop it, and Willow immediately regretted it. Personal questions led to personal answers, and personal answers led to connections she did not want. But Frank just shook his head. "No, madam, I am from Texas originally. Been moving around since I was 18, seeing different parts of the country. Figured I wanted to know what was out here before I settled down anywhere permanent." "And will you? Settle down, I mean." She busied herself wrapping the apples, not looking at him. Maybe. Sonora seems like a good place. Good people, good land, a man could build something here. There was no hidden meaning in his words, no suggestion or innuendo, but Willow felt her defenses rise anyway. Building requires staying, she said shortly. Most men I have known are better at leaving. Frank was quiet for a moment. When he spoke, his voice was gentle. I suppose that is true for some. My father was one of those men. Left when I was 10, and we never heard from him again. My mother raised me and my 3 sisters on her own. Worked herself into an early grave doing it too. Willow looked up, startled by the admission. There was no self-pity in his expression, just a quiet acknowledgement of facts. I am sorry, she said, and meant it. Thank you. It taught me something, though. Taught me that staying is harder than leaving, and that the people who stay are the ones worth respecting. My mother stayed. She could have given us up, could have walked away from the burden of 4 children and no husband, but she stayed, and she made sure we all grew up knowing how to work hard and treat people right. He paid for the apples and left, and Willow stood behind the counter for a long time afterward, thinking about staying and leaving, and about the ghosts that followed people across the miles. That evening, as she was locking up Mrs. Henderson stopped by with a basket covered in a checkered cloth. This is for you, dear, she said, pressing it into Willow's hands. Just some fresh bread and jam to thank you for always treating Billy so kindly when he comes in for his penny candy. You do not need to thank me, Willow protested. He is a sweet boy. He is alive because you cared enough to run toward danger when you saw him in trouble, Mrs. Henderson said firmly. And because that young man, Frank O'Brien, was paying attention, Billy talks about him all the time now, says he wants to be a cowboy just like him when he grows up. She smiled. Frank has been out to the house twice to visit, bringing Billy little gifts. A smooth stone from the creek, a feather from a hawk, things like that. Never stays long, never makes a fuss about it. Just checks on Billy and leaves. He is a good man, that one. After Mrs. Henderson left, Willow carried the basket upstairs to her small apartment. She ate the bread and jam for dinner and tried not to think about Frank O'Brien visiting a little boy just to make sure he was all right. Tried not to think about how that simple kindness made something in her chest ache. The next few weeks passed in a blur of normal activity, but Willow could feel something shifting inside her, some long frozen part of her beginning to thaw against her will. She found herself looking forward to Frank's visits. Found herself preparing little observations to share with him. The way the light hit the mountains in the morning. A funny thing old Mr. Chen had said. The taste of the new shipment of coffee beans. They were small things, inconsequential things, but they felt dangerous in their intimacy. One morning in early June, Frank came in looking troubled. Morning, Miss Ortega, he said, but his usual warmth was subdued. Is something wrong? The question was automatic, and Willow immediately wanted to take it back. She did not want to care about his troubles. She did not want to care about anything to do with him. It is nothing serious. Well, it is serious, but not dangerous. One of the ranch dogs had puppies about 8 weeks ago, and Mr. O'Donnell says we cannot keep them all. He is going to have them drowned if we cannot find homes for them by the end of the week. Frank's jaw tightened. I have been asking around town, but most folks already have dogs or do not want the trouble of training a puppy. That is unfortunate, Willow said carefully. There are 5 of them left. I took one myself even though I can barely afford to feed him, but the others... He trailed off, then seemed to shake himself. Sorry, I should not burden you with this. I came in for some rope and a new whetstone. Willow gathered his items in silence, but her mind was working. That evening, after she closed the store, she found herself walking out to the O'Donnell Ranch. It was a 40-minute walk, and by the time she arrived, the sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and gold. Frank was in the barn when she found him, brushing down a large bay horse. He looked up in surprise when he saw her. Miss Ortega, is everything all right? I came about the puppies, she said, the words tumbling out before she could reconsider. I will take them, all 4 of the remaining ones. All 4? Frank set down the brush, staring at her. Miss Ortega, that is incredibly generous, but 4 puppies is a lot of work and expense. I could not ask you to do that. You did not ask. I am offering. Willow lifted her chin. I have the space above the store. I can afford to feed them. And I assume you can help me find homes for them once they are old enough to be separated? People are more likely to take a puppy if they do not feel pressured by a deadline. Frank's face broke into a smile. The first genuine, unguarded smile she had seen from him, and it transformed his features completely. That would be wonderful. Better than wonderful. Thank you, Miss Ortega. Thank you so much. It is nothing, Willow said, but she could feel heat rising in her cheeks. I just did not want to see animals killed unnecessarily. It is not nothing, Frank said quietly. It is kindness. And that is never nothing. They stood there in the barn, the last light of day filtering through the cracks in the walls, and something passed between them that Willow could not name but could definitely feel. It terrified her. I should get back to town before full dark, she said abruptly. Let me saddle a horse and ride with you. It is not safe for a woman alone on the roads after sunset. I walked here alone, and I will worry about you walking back alone. Please, Miss Ortega, let me do this. There was no presumption in his request, no sense that he was trying to force his company on her. He simply wanted her to be safe. After a moment, Willow nodded. Frank saddled 2 horses, and they rode back to town side by side. He kept the pace easy, not trying to talk over the sound of the hooves, just a comfortable silence that Willow found herself appreciating. When they reached her store, he helped her down from the horse, and this time, when his hands briefly touched hers, she did not pull away. I will bring the puppies by tomorrow, he said, and I will help you set up a place for them. That is not necessary. I know, but I want to help. The next day, Frank arrived in the early afternoon with a wagon carrying 4 squirming puppies and an assortment of supplies. I brought some old blankets and a crate that can serve as a bed, he explained, and Mr. O'Donnell sent some scraps from the kitchen to get them started. Together, they set up a space in the back room of the store, and Willow found herself laughing, actually laughing, as the puppies tumbled over each other and chewed on everything within reach. Frank showed her how to handle them, how to start basic training, how to read their signals. This one is going to be trouble, he said, holding up a black and white puppy with one ear that flopped over. She is the smartest of the bunch, and smart dogs need a lot of attention or they will find their own entertainment, which usually means destroying things. Maybe I will keep that one then, Willow said without thinking. I could use some entertainment. Frank looked at her with such warmth that she had to turn away, busying herself with the puppies to hide her confusion. Why had she said that? She did not want a dog. She did not want anything that would tie her down or make her care about something other than her orderly, controlled life. But when Frank left that evening, she found herself sitting on the floor of the back room, letting the black and white puppy climb into her lap and fall asleep there. And she could not remember the last time she had felt this peaceful. Over the next several weeks, Frank became a daily presence at the store. He would stop by in the morning before heading to the ranch, checking on the puppies and bringing scraps for their meals. He taught Willow how to train them, how to be firm but patient, how to reward good behavior and redirect bad. He helped her build a small, fenced area behind the store where they could play and do their business. Slowly, the puppies found homes. A brown one went to the Johnsons, who had lost their old dog to age the previous winter. A golden one went to the school teacher, who wanted a companion. The smallest one, a gentle creature with soulful eyes, went to old Mr. Chen, who cried when Frank suggested it might be nice to have something to come home to after long days in the mines. Only the black and white one remained, the troublemaker that Willow had claimed for herself. She named her Daisy, though she told no one the name for the first week, as if keeping it secret would somehow make the attachment less real. Frank noticed, of course. He seemed to notice everything about her, even the things she tried to hide. Daisy is a nice name, he said one morning, scratching the puppy behind her ears. Suits her. I did not tell you her name, Willow said, startled. You did not have to. I heard you talking to her last evening when I was walking by. The back door was open. Willow felt heat rush to her face. She had been telling Daisy about her day, about the customers who had come in, about the strange shipment of goods that had arrived with half the labels in French. She had been talking to the dog like she was a person, something she had not done since her father died. "I must have sounded foolish," she said, her voice tight. "You sounded happy," Frank said simply. "It was nice to hear." He left before she could respond, and Willow stood there with Daisy at her feet, feeling like the walls she had built so carefully were crumbling faster than she could repair them. One evening in late July, Willow was closing up when she heard shouting from the saloon again. She ignored it at first, focused on counting the day's receipts, but then she heard Frank's voice, raised in a way she had never heard before. "That is enough, Davis. Leave her alone." Willow moved to the window and looked out. Frank was standing between one of the saloon girls and a drunk miner who was twice his size. The girl, a young woman named Sarah, whom Willow knew slightly, was crying and trying to straighten her torn dress. "Mind your business, O'Brien," the miner snarled. "I paid for her time." "You paid for drinks and conversation, not the right to hurt her. Now back off, or I will make you back off." The miner swung, a wild haymaker that Frank ducked easily, but instead of fighting back, Frank grabbed the man's arm, twisted it behind his back, and forced him down to his knees with surprising efficiency. "You are going to apologize to Sarah," Frank said calmly, "and then you are going to go sleep this off. And if I ever see you lay hands on a woman again, drunk or sober, you will answer to me. Do you understand?" The miner grunted something that might have been agreement, and Frank released him. He helped Sarah to her feet, spoke to her quietly for a moment, and then walked her back to the boarding house where the saloon girls stayed. Willow watched all of this from her window, her heart pounding. She knew Frank could not see her, hidden as she was behind the curtain, but she felt exposed anyway, as if he could somehow sense her watching, could somehow know what she was feeling. What was she feeling? Fear, certainly, the old familiar fear that came from watching men be violent, even in defense of others. But there was something else too, something that felt dangerously like admiration, like trust, like the beginnings of something she had sworn she would never feel again. She locked the store and went upstairs, but sleep eluded her again. Daisy seemed to sense her restlessness and climbed onto the bed, curling up against her side. Willow stroked the dog's soft fur and tried to sort through the tangle of emotions in her chest. Every man before Frank had proven himself unworthy of trust. Her father, who had been good and kind, but had still gotten himself killed and left her alone. Thomas, who had seemed loving until the moment he revealed his true nature. The men in Santa Fe who had tried to court her after her father's death, seeing only a vulnerable woman with property to claim. The men in Sonora who had propositioned her, offered to take care of her, suggested she needed a husband to run her store properly. But Frank had never done any of those things. For months now, he had simply shown up day after day, asking for nothing, offering everything. He had saved a child without seeking recognition. He had walked away from fights. He had cared about puppies. He had defended a woman whose society barely considered worth defending. He had been patient with Willow's coldness, respectful of her boundaries, kind without expectation of reward. Day by day, he had proven himself different. And day by day, despite all her defenses, despite all her promises to herself, Willow had fallen halfway in love with him without even realizing it was happening. The realization should have terrified her. Instead, lying there in the darkness with Daisy's warm weight against her side, Willow felt something that might have been hope. The next morning, Willow woke with a sense of purpose she had not felt in years. She dressed carefully, taking time with her hair, choosing her blue dress instead of the usual brown. She opened the store at her regular time, but her hands were unsteady as she went through the familiar motions of her morning routine. Frank arrived just after 8, his usual time. He looked tired, with dark circles under his eyes that suggested he had not slept well either, but his smile when he saw her was genuine and warm. "Morning, Miss Ortega. Is Daisy behaving herself?" "She chewed through one of my good shoes last night," Willow said. but there was no real annoyance in her voice. I think she was upset that I was restless. You were restless? There was concern in his voice. Is everything all right? This was the moment. Willow could deflect, could retreat back behind her walls, could continue as they had been, existing in this strange, comfortable limbo where neither of them acknowledged what was growing between them. It would be safer that way. Easier. But she was so tired of safe and easy. She was so tired of being alone. I saw what you did last night, she said quietly, as with Sarah and that miner. Frank's expression became guarded. I see. It was a good thing you did, standing up for her like that. It was the right thing to do. No man should put his hands on a woman in anger. No, Willow agreed, but many men do anyway. She took a breath, gathering her courage. I have been thinking, Mr. O'Brien. Frank, I have been thinking about a lot of things. He waited, giving her time, not pushing. It was so characteristic of him that Willow felt her resolve strengthen. 3 years ago, I was engaged to be married. His name was Thomas Whitfield, and I thought I knew him. I thought he was a good man. On our wedding day before the ceremony, he got into an argument with my father over a piece of land. Thomas wanted my father to sign it over as part of my dowry, and my father refused. He said it would belong to me, not to my husband. Thomas shot him. Right there, with me standing in my wedding dress, with guests waiting at the church, he shot my father over a piece of land. Frank's face went pale, but he did not interrupt. My father died in my arms. Thomas rode out of town and was never caught. I spent 3 months settling my father's affairs, and then I came here to start over. I promised myself I would never trust another man, never let anyone close enough to hurt me again, and I have kept that promise for 3 years. Miss Ortega, Frank started, but she held up her hand. Please, let me finish. I need to say this before I lose my courage. She looked at him directly, letting him see the vulnerability she usually hid. You have been coming to my store for months now. At first I barely noticed you. Then I started to notice but told myself it did not matter. But it does matter, Frank. You matter. The way you are, the things you do, the man you have proven yourself to be day after day, it matters to me. And that terrifies me, because I do not know if I can do this. I do not know if I can trust again, if I can open myself up to the possibility of being hurt again, but I think I want to try. With you. If you want that too. The silence that followed felt endless. Willow could hear her own heartbeat, could hear Daisy snoring softly in the back room, could hear the distant sounds of the town waking up outside. She kept her eyes on Frank's face, watching as surprise gave way to understanding. Understanding gave way to something tender and careful. I want that, he said finally, his voice rough with emotion. God, Miss Ortega, Willow, I have wanted that since the first time I saw you, but I knew you were not ready, and I did not want to push. I figured if I just showed up and was patient, maybe eventually you would see that I'm not like whoever hurt you, that I would never hurt you. I see it, Willow whispered. I've been seeing it for a while now. I was just too scared to admit it. Frank took a step toward her, then stopped, clearly uncertain about what was allowed now. Willow closed the distance between them herself, placing her hand on his chest. She could feel his heart racing under her palm, as fast as her own. Can I court you properly? Frank asked. Can I take you to dinner, walk with you, spend time with you without the excuse of needing to buy something from your store? Yes, Willow said, and felt a smile tugging at her lips, unfamiliar but genuine. Yes, you can. Frank covered her hand with his own, and for the first time in 3 years, Willow did not flinch away from a man's touch. Instead, she stepped closer, letting herself lean into him just slightly, testing this new territory. We will go slow, Frank promised, as slow as you need. I am not going anywhere, Willow. I am here and I am staying. The word resonated through her, staying. The hardest thing, the most important thing, Thomas had left without looking back. Her father had been taken from her. But Frank was promising to stay, and day by day he had already proven that his promises meant something. Over the next several months, Frank courted Willow with a patience and tenderness that gradually dissolved the last of her defenses. He took her to dinner at the boarding house, where Mrs. Patterson served roast chicken and apple pie. He walked with her in the evenings, Daisy trotting along beside them, talking about everything and nothing. He told her about his childhood in Texas, about his mother's strength, about his sisters who had all married and settled down in different towns. Willow, in turn, found herself opening up about her own past. She told him about her mother, who had died of fever when Willow was 16, about her father's ranch, which she had loved but sold after his death because she could not bear to stay there, about the loneliness of the past 3 years, the way she had deliberately cut herself off from connection because connection meant vulnerability. "I understand that," Frank said one evening as they sat on the bench outside her store watching the sun set over the mountains. "After my father left, I did not let myself get close to anyone for years. I was afraid that if I cared about people, they would leave too. But my mother, before she died, she told me something that changed how I thought about it. She said that closing yourself off does not protect you from pain. It just guarantees that you will be alone with it when it comes." Willow leaned against his shoulder, marveling at how natural it felt now to be close to him. "Your mother sounds like she was a wise woman." "She was. I think she would have liked you. You remind me of her, actually. Strong, independent, not willing to settle for less than you deserve." "Am I strong?" Willow asked quietly. "I ran away from everything I knew. I hid behind a counter for 3 years, refusing to feel anything." "You survived," Frank said firmly. "You built a life for yourself alone, in a new town where you knew no one. You took care of yourself when no one else would. That is strength, Willow. And now you are brave enough to try again, to let someone in even though you have every reason not to. That is strength too." As autumn arrived, bringing cooler temperatures and golden light to the California hills, Willow felt herself transforming. The ice that had encased her heart for so long was melting, and beneath it, she found the person she used to be. The woman who had laughed easily and loved fiercely and believed in the goodness of people. She was different now, tempered by pain and loss, but she was still there, still capable of joy. Frank was patient with her fears, never pushing when she retreated, always there when she reached out. When she woke from nightmares about blood on white fabric, he held her hand and talked to her about the future they could build together. When she panicked during a thunderstorm because the sound of rain reminded her of the day her father died, he sat with her in the store and taught her card games until she calmed down. And slowly, so slowly that Willow barely noticed it happening, she fell completely in love with him. By November, they had become a fixture in Sonora, the shopkeeper and the cowboy, always together in the evenings, always walking side by side. The town watched their courtship with interest and approval, glad to see the Ice Queen thawing, happy to see Frank O'Brien find someone worthy of his steady kindness. One evening, as the first frost touched the ground, Frank asked Willow to walk with him out to the creek that ran along the edge of town. It was their place now, somewhere they had spent many evenings talking and simply being together. "I have been thinking," Frank said as they stood by the water, watching the moonlight ripple across the surface, "about the future." Willow's heart began to race. "Have you?" "I have been saving money. Mr. O'Donnell has offered to sell me a parcel of his land, about 50 acres on the south edge of his property. It is good grazing land with water access and timber for building. I could start my own place there. Not a big operation, not at first, but something that could grow." "That sounds wonderful, Frank." He turned to face her, taking both her hands in his. "I want to build a house there, Willow. Not a fancy house, but a good one. Sturdy and warm, with a big kitchen and a porch where we could sit in the evenings. I want to build it for us, for our life together." Willow felt tears welling up, but they were not sad tears. "Are you asking me to marry you?" "I am asking if you think you could, if you have healed enough, if you trust me enough. I love you. Willow, I have loved you for months now, probably since that first time you ran out of your store to help Billy Henderson. I want to spend my life with you, proving every single day that you can trust me, that I will never let you down. But only if you are ready, only if you want that too. Willow thought about the past 3 years, about the woman she had been when she arrived in Sonora, cold, closed off, convinced that all men were the same. She thought about how wrong she had been, how Frank had shown her day by day that trust was not foolish, that love was not a weakness, that opening your heart was the bravest thing a person could do. I want that, she said, her voice steady despite the tears on her cheeks. I want to marry you, Frank O'Brien. I want to build a life with you. I want to wake up every morning knowing you are there, knowing you will stay. Yes. My answer is yes. Frank pulled her into his arms, and Willow let herself be held, let herself feel safe for the first time in 3 years. When he kissed her, it was gentle and sweet and full of promise. It tasted like hope, like new beginnings, like all the tomorrows they would share. They were married in January of 1879 in the small church in Sonora. It was nothing like Willow's first almost wedding. This time there was no elaborate dress, no huge crowd of guests, just a simple ceremony with the people they cared about, Mrs. Henderson and Billy, who served as ring bearer, old Mr. Chen, who cried happy tears, the O'Donnells and several of the ranch hands, the school teacher and Sarah from the saloon, who had become unlikely friends with Willow over the past months. And this time, when Willow stood in front of the preacher in her dress of pale green with Frank's hand warm in hers, there was no gunshot, no blood, no tragedy. There was only love, steady and true, and the promise of a future built on trust earned day by day. They spent their wedding night in the room above the store which Willow still owned and ran. In the spring they would break ground on the house Frank had described, but for now, they were content with the small space that had been Willow's refuge for 3 years. "Are you happy?" Frank asked as they lay together, Daisy snoring softly from her bed in the corner. "I am," Willow said, and realized with wonder that it was completely true. "I did not think I could be again, but I am." "I will make sure you stay that way," Frank promised, "every day for the rest of our lives." And he did. The house they built that spring and summer was everything Frank had promised. Not fancy, but solid and warm, with a big kitchen where Willow could bake bread and a wide porch where they could sit in the evenings. Frank started his ranch with 5 head of cattle and 2 horses, building slowly and carefully, never overextending, always planning for the long term. Willow kept the store in town, hiring a young woman named Margaret to help run it 3 days a week so she could spend more time at the ranch. She found she loved the balance, the way she could be independent and self-sufficient while also being part of a partnership. Frank never tried to control her business or make decisions for her. He simply supported her, helped when she asked, and respected her judgment. Their life fell into a comfortable rhythm. Frank worked the ranch during the day while Willow minded the store. In the evenings, they would come together, sharing meals and conversation and the easy companionship of 2 people who genuinely liked each other as much as they loved each other. On Sundays, they would rest, walking the property with Daisy, making plans for the future, simply enjoying the peace they had built. In the fall of 1879, Willow discovered she was pregnant. The news brought a complicated mix of emotions, joy certainly and excitement, but also fear. What if something went wrong? What if she lost Frank the way she had lost her father? What if she was not strong enough to be a mother? Frank, as always, was patient with her fears. "We will face whatever comes together," he told her, his hand resting gently on her still flat stomach. "And nothing is going to take me away from you. I'm not going anywhere. Remember, I am here and I am staying." The pregnancy was difficult at times, with Willow suffering from sickness and fatigue. But Frank was there through all of it, rubbing her back when she was ill, taking over more of the household work, bringing her treats from town to tempt her appetite. The women of Sonora rallied around her too, Mrs. Henderson and Margaret and even Sarah, offering advice and support and hand-me-down baby clothes. In May of 1880, Willow gave birth to a healthy baby boy. They named him James, after her father, and when Frank placed the tiny bundle in her arms for the first time, Willow wept with relief and joy and gratitude. This was what she had almost missed, what she would never have had if she had kept her heart closed. This perfect moment, this perfect family. Frank was a devoted father, patient and playful with James even when the baby was fussy or difficult. Willow would often find them together in the nursery, Frank walking the floor with James against his shoulder, singing old cowboy songs in his low voice. Watching them together, Willow would feel her heart swell with a love so big it almost hurt. As James grew from baby to toddler, the ranch grew too. Frank's herd expanded, and he hired 2 ranch hands to help with the work. The house saw improvements, a new barn, a chicken coop, a vegetable garden that Willow tended with James toddling along beside her. The store in town continued to thrive, becoming a cornerstone of the community. In 1882, their daughter was born, a tiny girl with Frank's dark hair and Willow's determined chin. They named her Rose, and she was as sweet and gentle as her brother was boisterous and wild. Frank doted on both children equally, teaching James to ride and rope, while also learning to braid Rose's hair and host elaborate tea parties with her stuffed animals. Life was not always easy. There were hard winters and dry summers, sick livestock and broken equipment, moments of financial stress and physical exhaustion. But through it all, Frank and Willow faced everything together. They had built something real and lasting, a love based not on passion alone, but on trust, respect, and the daily choice to show up for each other. On their 5th anniversary, as they sat on their porch watching the sunset while the children played in the yard with Daisy, Willow thought about how much she had changed since arriving in Sonora. That frightened, broken woman seemed like a stranger now, someone from another lifetime. "What are you thinking about?" Frank asked, his arm around her shoulders. "About how wrong I was," Willow said. "When I came here, I thought all men were the same. I thought trust was foolish and love was a trap. I was so angry and so scared." "You had every right to be. After what you went through, anyone would feel that way. But I was still wrong. Not all men are like Thomas. Some men are like you, good and kind and true. You proved that to me day by day until I could not deny it anymore." Frank kissed her temple. "You proved something to me too. You proved that wounded things can heal, that closed hearts can open again, that it is never too late to start over. I love you, Willow. More today than yesterday and less than I will tomorrow." They sat there as the light faded, the children's laughter mixing with the sound of evening birds, and Willow felt a contentment so deep it seemed to fill her completely. This was what happiness looked like. Not perfect, not without challenges, but real and earned and cherished. As the years passed, the O'Brien Ranch became one of the most successful in the area, known for the quality of its cattle and the integrity of its owners. James grew into a serious, thoughtful young man who loved the land as much as his father did. Rose became a spirited girl with a gift for music and a talent for bringing people together. The store in Sonora remained in the family, with Margaret eventually buying a half interest and running it alongside Willow. It became a gathering place for the community, somewhere people came not just for goods but for conversation and connection. In 1889, when Frank's youngest sister Martha found herself widowed with 3 young children, they opened their home to her without hesitation. Martha helped on the ranch and with the children, becoming an integral part of their family. Watching Martha heal from her own loss, finding joy again in the safety and support of their home, Willow was reminded of her own journey. "You did the same for me," she told Frank one night. "You gave me a safe place to heal, patience, while I found myself again. Now we get to do that for Martha." "That is what family does," Frank said simply. "We show up for each other. We stay." In 1895, James married a rancher's daughter from the next county, a bright young woman named Elizabeth who fit seamlessly into their family. The wedding was a joyful affair, held at the ranch with half of Sonora in attendance. Dancing under the stars, watching her son begin his own journey, Willow felt the circle of her life completing in the most beautiful way. Rose followed 2 years later, marrying a doctor who had recently moved to town. Her wedding was held in the spring, with wildflowers decorating the church and a reception that lasted well into the night. As grandchildren began to arrive, Willow and Frank settled into their roles as matriarch and patriarch of a growing family. They were in their 40s now, no longer young but not yet old, with silver threading through their hair and lines etched around their eyes from years of laughter and hard work. The 20th century arrived, bringing changes to Sonora and to the world beyond. But on the O'Brien Ranch, some things remained constant. The land, carefully tended and passed from one generation to the next. The house, expanded and improved, but still recognizably the home Frank had built. And the love between Willow and Frank, as strong and steady as it had been that night by the creek when he had promised to prove himself worthy every single day. On their 25th anniversary in 1904, their children and grandchildren gathered for a celebration. The house was full of noise and life, children running through the rooms while adults caught up on news and shared stories. It was everything Willow had never dared to dream of during those dark years after her father's death. That evening, after everyone had gone to bed, Willow and Frank walked out to their porch, the place where they had spent thousands of evenings together. The night was clear and cool, stars blazing overhead in the vast California sky. "Do you ever think about what your life would have been like if we had never met?" Willow asked. Frank considered the question. "Sometimes. I suppose I would have kept drifting, working here and there, never putting down roots. I would have missed out on everything that matters. This ranch, our children, you. What about you? What would you have done?" "I would have stayed frozen," Willow said honestly. "I would have run my store and kept everyone at arm's length and convinced myself I was safe. But I would not have been happy. I would not have lived, not really. I would have just existed." "I am glad we found each other then," Frank said, pulling her close. "I'm glad you gave me a chance, even though you had every reason not to." "You earned that chance," Willow said. "Day by day, you proved yourself different from every man who had come before. You were patient when I needed patience, steady when I needed stability, present when I needed to know I was not alone. You saved me, Frank. Not in some dramatic rescue, but in all the small ways that really matter." "We saved each other," Frank corrected gently. "You gave me a purpose, a reason to stay in one place and build something lasting. You gave me a family and a home. You taught me that love is not something that just happens. It is something you choose every day, even when it is hard." They stood there, wrapped in each other's arms. Two people who had found each other against all odds, who had chosen each other every day for 25 years, who would continue to choose each other for all the years to come. As the new century unfolded, bringing automobiles and telephones and all manner of modern conveniences to even small towns like Sonora, the O'Brien Ranch adapted but held fast to its core values: hard work, family loyalty, and the understanding that trust and love were built through daily action, not grand gestures. In 1910, James took over the primary management of the ranch, with Frank transitioning into an advisory role. It was not easy for Frank to step back from the work he loved, but he did it with grace, trusting his son to carry on what they had built together. Willow, too, gradually handed more responsibility to Margaret at the store, though she still went in several days a week, unable to fully let go of the business that had been her salvation when she first arrived in Sonora. Their twilight years were golden ones, filled with grandchildren and great-grandchildren, with long walks around the property and quiet evenings by the fire. Daisy had long since passed, but there had been other dogs, a succession of loyal companions that filled the house with life and love. The current dog, a shepherd mix named Duke, followed Frank everywhere, just as devoted as Daisy had been to Willow all those years ago. In 1918, the world was embroiled in a terrible war overseas, and Sonora was not untouched by it. Their grandson Thomas, James's eldest son, enlisted and went to fight in France. The waiting and worrying during those months tested everyone in the family, but they held together, supporting each other through the fear and uncertainty. When Thomas returned home safely in 1919, the celebration was heartfelt and tearful. Watching her grandson reunite with his young wife and infant daughter, Willow was reminded once again of how precious family was, how the bonds they had built over decades could sustain them through the darkest times. Frank's health began to decline in his early 70s, a gradual slowing that he bore with characteristic patience and good humor. Willow nursed him through pneumonia one winter and a broken leg the next summer, and Frank joked that she was finally getting her revenge for all the times he had cared for her during her difficult pregnancy with James. But despite the challenges of aging, they remained devoted to each other, still finding joy in simple things. Morning coffee on the porch, visits from grandchildren, the change of seasons on their beloved land, the sound of each other's voices after 50 years of conversation. In the spring of 1925, as they approached their 46th anniversary, Frank caught a fever that would not break. The doctor came from town, did what he could, but they all knew what was coming. The family gathered, filling the house once more, but Frank asked for time alone with Willow. She sat beside his bed, holding his hand, and tried to memorize every detail of his face, older now, lined and weathered, but still the face of the man she loved more than anything in the world. "I kept my promise," Frank said, his voice weak but clear. "I stayed." "You did," Willow agreed, tears streaming down her face. "Every day for all these years you stayed. You proved yourself worthy of trust over and over again." "Do not close yourself off again," Frank said urgently. "After I am gone, promise me you will stay open, stay connected to our family, stay part of this world we built together." "I promise," Willow whispered. "But Frank, I do not know how to do this without you." "Yes, you do. You are the strongest person I have ever known. You survived losing your father. You will survive losing me, and you will not be alone. Our children, our grandchildren, they all love you so much. Let them help you. Let them in." He died that evening peacefully, with Willow's hand in his and their family surrounding them. Willow felt something tear inside her chest, a pain different from but equal to what she had felt when her father died all those decades ago. But this time, she was not alone. James held her while she wept. Rose brought her tea and sat with her through the long night. Martha, now in her 70s herself, shared memories of Frank's kindness to her in her darkest time. The funeral was held at the ranch, under the wide California sky Frank had loved. It seemed like the entire town came to pay their respects, a testament to the life he had lived and the man he had been. Person after person shared stories of Frank's kindness, his integrity, his willingness to help anyone in need. Willow listened to them all, storing each story like a treasure, proof that her faith in him had been well placed. In the months that followed, Willow grieved deeply, but not in isolation. She leaned on her family, accepted their comfort, and slowly found her way to a new normal. She spent time with her grandchildren and great-grandchildren, passing on stories of Frank and the life they had built. She went to the store regularly, finding comfort in the familiar routine. She walked the ranch, remembering all the times she and Frank had walked it together, making plans and dreaming dreams. And gradually, very gradually, she found that she could be happy again. Not the same happiness she had known with Frank beside her, but a quieter contentment. She had loved and been loved. She had trusted and been proven right to trust. She had lived a full and beautiful life, and she could be grateful for that even as she mourned what was lost. On what would have been their 50th anniversary in 1929, the family gathered at the ranch for a celebration of Frank's life and the legacy he had left. They planted a tree near the house, a strong oak that would grow and provide shade for generations to come. As Willow placed her hand on the young trunk, she thought about all the ways Frank's influence would continue to ripple outward through their children and their children's children. "You did good, my love," she whispered. "We did good together." Willow lived another 8 years, dying peacefully in her sleep in 1937 at the age of 83. She was buried next to Frank on the ranch, under the oak tree that had grown tall and strong, and when their family gathered to say goodbye, they did not mourn. They celebrated instead, telling stories of the love that had sustained them all, the trust that had been earned day by day, the life that had been built on patience and kindness, and the daily choice to stay. The O'Brien Ranch remained in the family for generations, a testament to what Frank and Willow had created together. And whenever anyone asked about the founders, the stories told were always the same. He had been patient and kind and true. She had been wounded, but brave enough to heal. Together they had proven that trust broken could be rebuilt, that love was worth the risk, and that the simple act of showing up day after day was the foundation of everything that mattered. Their story became a legend in Sonora, passed down through the years. The shopkeeper who had sworn off love and the cowboy who had proven himself different day by day, until her heart could not help but open to him. It was a story about the healing power of steady devotion, about the courage required to try again after betrayal, about the quiet heroism of choosing love every single day. And in the end, it was a story with the happiest of endings. Not because nothing bad ever happened, not because life was always easy, but because two people had found each other, had built something beautiful together, and had loved each other completely for all the days they were given. The oak tree still stands on the O'Brien Ranch, tall and spreading, its branches full of birdsong. The house still stands too, renovated and updated, but recognizable as the home Frank built with his own hands. And if you stand on the porch in the evening watching the sun set over the California hills, you might almost feel their presence, the shopkeeper and the cowboy, the woman who had given up on trust, and the man who had earned it back for her day by precious day. Their love story had been neither quick nor easy. It had been built slowly, carefully, with patience and respect and the willingness to show up even when it was hard. But it had been real, and it had lasted, and it had created something that would endure long after they were gone. A family, a legacy, and the proof that even the most broken trust could be restored by someone willing to prove themselves worthy, one day at a time.